We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Beis and Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma, Daf 68b. The Gemara is in the middle of bringing a statement from Rebbe Lazar. Rebbe Lazar says, Teda, you should know, Shestam Geneva Yeyesh Bailamhu, that in general, when there's Geneva, we assume that the original owners were Meyayesh, the original owners have given up hope. Why? Shahare Omra Torah Tavachu Machar, because the Torah says, if he slaughters or sells the animal, Meshalim Tashlomer Bava Chamisha, he pays 4 or 5 times the amount. V'dilma lo Yayesh. Now, why is that true? Maybe there was no Yish, and therefore it has to be, Rebbe Lazar is assuming that you have to have Yish because the sale has to be effective in order to be Chayev Daled V'hei. That is clear from what Rebbe Lazar is saying, and that's why Rebbe Lazar is saying it must be that we just assume there's Yish, and since we assume there's Yish, you have a Yish and Shinei Rishus, and that's why when he sells it, he's Chayev Daled V'hei. And that's what Rebbe Lazar says, Elalav, rather is it not, Mishum da'amrinan stam geneva yish bailam, because we assume anytime there's a geneva, there's a yish bailam, and again, that's why when he sells the animal, he's chayiv dalid v'hei. And Rashi explains, Teda shestam geneva miyad misyash. And the point is that when there's a geneva, immediately we assume yish. V'machron ganav la'achar miyad kana. And therefore, if the ganav would sell it immediately after, it would be a kinyan. De'ikotarta yish v'shinei rishus, because you have both yish and shinei rishus. Umimai shaharei amra Torah ganav u'machar mishalim dalid v'hei. And how do we know that? Because the Torah says that if he steals and sells it, he pays dalid v'hei. V'adilma lo yayish mar, but maybe the original owner was not miyayish. V'lab mechira, then it wouldn't be a sale, and he wouldn't be chayiv daled v'hei. Again, clearly, Rebbe Lazar holds it has to be a valid sale for it to be daled v'hei. Rather, it must be that in general we assume immediately after a geneva there's yish bailim. Alma midiyolef Rebbe Lazar taima mehai. So you see from the fact that Rebbe Lazar learns from that, shma minok Rav Sheshes svirla. You see that he holds like Rav Sheshes that if it is not an effective sale, there's no daled v'hei. The shamana le lamora behedya delo yayish. So for example, if we heard the owner say explicitly that he's not giving up hope, pater hamocher midaled v'hei, then the person who sells it would actually be pater from daled v'hei. And the Gemara now says, "V'dil ma'afagav de lo yayish." Well, why does Rebbe Lazar even assume that? Maybe the situation is even if there was no yish, and maybe it doesn't have to be an effective sale. Meaning, where's Rebbe Lazar getting that from? Rashi says, "V'dil ma'chayvi rachmana v'yafagav de lo yayish." Maybe the Torah says chayiv for selling a daled v'hei even without yish. But Rebbe Lazar parach, the Gemara is asking on Rebbe Lazar, the yolef mehacha yish l'stam geneva, because he's learning from here that there's an automatic yish immediately when there's stam geneva. Why does he make all of these assumptions? Maybe even selling it without yish is enough to be mechayiv daled v'hei. And to that the Gemara says, Amri, the sages say, Lo sal kadaitach, don't think that is the case, because dumya de tvicha, because we compare the sale to tvicha, to slaughtering the animal where there's daled v'hei, ma tvicha da hanumaisav, just like when he slaughters the animal, what he did is obviously effective, the animal is dead, af mechira da hanumaisav, so to when it comes to selling the animal, it has to be an effective sale, v'ilif ne'ish mayahanu, and if he sold it before yish, in what way was it effective? Of course, that's not effective. And the Gemara says, v'dilma de shamina de yayish, but maybe the situation is where we heard the owner be miyayish. How do you know that stam geneva immediately we assume the owner is miyayish? Amri, the sages say to that, lo sal gadayatach, don't think that's the case either, because dumya de tvicha, because again it has to be similar to slaughtering, ma tvicha la'alter, just like if he slaughters it immediately there's daled v'hei, af mechir la'alter, so too if he sells it immediately there's daled v'hei, and the idea is that we assume immediately there is yish. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan says to Rebbe Lazar, geneva benefesh tochiach, when it comes to kidnapping, that proves you wrong. She'ein yish bailam, because over there the person who is kidnapped is not giving up hope on himself. V'chayiv, and yet over there the halach is that if a person kidnaps somebody else and sells that individual, he's chayiv misa. And therefore Rabbi Yochanan is arguing, even though the sale is ineffective, it's clearly before yish, still apparently there is a chayiv, and the same thing should be true by daled v'hei. Mechlal, the Savar Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara notes that implies that Rabbi Yochanan holds lefnei yish chayiv, that if the person sells before yish, there is going to be an obligation to pay daled v'hei. And so the Gemara asks, la'achar yish mai, what about after yish? Let's say a person sells after yish, what would Rabbi Yochanan say in that situation? And the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan amar chayiv. Rabbi Yochanan says, also in that situation chayiv, because Rabbi Yochanan holds yish alone doesn't create a kinyan, and therefore, again, if you sell after yish, it's also going to be daled v'hei. Reish Lakish amar pater, but Reish Lakish says pater if you sell after yish, because Reish Lakish holds yish alone is a kinyan, and therefore he's selling his own property. Rabbi Yochanan amar chayiv. Rabbi Yochanan says chayiv chiyuvei bein lifnei yish bein la'achar yish. He says the obligation to pay daled v'hei, it doesn't matter if it's before yish or after yish, it makes no difference. Again, if it's before yish, there's still going to be daled v'hei. It doesn't have to be an effective sale, and if it's after yish, it's going to be daled v'hei, because yish alone does not create a kinyan. Reish Lakish Amar Potter, Reish Lakish says Potter, Chiyuve Lifnei Yiyoshu, because the obligation is only when the sale takes place before Yeyosh, Aval Achar Yeyosh, but if he sells it after Yeyosh, so then Kana, then he actually acquires the object, V'shalohu Toveach, V'shalohu Mocher, and he's really slaughtering his own property, he's selling his own property, and therefore there is no Dalid V'hei. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan l'Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan asks Reish Lakish the following question from a Brisa. Again, Reish Lakish says that Yish is Kona, Yish alone is Kona. The Brisa says, Gonav v'hikdish. If a person steals the animal and he makes it hekdish, he's makdish it. V'achar kach tavach, and then he slaughters the animal. Meshalim tashlumei kefil, the halach is he does have to pay kefil like any ganav. Ve'eno meshalim tashlumei arba v'chamisha, but he doesn't pay 4 or 5 times the amount. The idea is that if, just like if you steal from hekdish, you don't pay kefil, because it says re'eu, it has to be his friend, it can't be hekdish. So too when it comes to dalid v'hei, since he made it hekdish, you don't pay dalid v'hei. Dalid v'hei is essentially an extension of kefil. There's no dalid v'hei by hekdish. And the Gemara says, Emas, when exactly did he slaughter the animal? Ilema lifnei yeyosh. If you're talking about this whole thing took place before yeyosh, so then he was makdish it before yeyosh, mi kadosh. Would that even be considered kadosh? It wouldn't be considered hekdish in such a situation, because it's not his. If he stole it and there was no yeyosh and there was no acquisition, it's not hekdish. Ish ki yakdish as beso kodesh amar achmana. The pasuk says that he has to be makdish his house, meaning his property, and that's what the Torah says. Ma beso shaloaf kol shalo, just like his house is his, so too a person can only be makdish something which is his. So elapshita la'achar yeyesh. So rather it's obvious, you have to say the case over here is he stole it, and there was yeyesh, and then he was makdish. V'taima dehikdishu de'enu meshalim tashlumi arba v'chamisha. And the only reason there's no dalid v'hei is because he made it hektish. That's why he doesn't pay dalid v'hei. There's no dalid v'hei on hektish. Dechi kotavach, the hektish kotavach, because what is he slaughtering? He's slaughtering an animal that belongs to hektish. There's no dalid v'hei. Avalo hektish, but if he wouldn't have made it hektish, tavach mashalim tashlumi arba v'chamisha, then it sounds like if he would slaughter it at that point in time, he would pay dalid v'hei. V'yisal gadai doch yish konan, if you think yish alone creates a kinyan, amay mashalim, why would he pay dalid v'hei? Shalohu tovech, shalohu mocher, he's slaughtering his own animal, he's selling his own animal, it's his, and there would be no dalid v'hei in that case. In other words, the only way to understand this brisa is to say that he stole it, there was yeyosh, yeyosh alone did not create a kinyan, but he's able to make it hektish, because then you have a yeyosh and a shinoi rishus, and because he made it hektish, there's no dalid v'hei. Again, that implies that yesh alone is not kona. And the Gemara continues, Amar Le, Reish Lakish said back to Rabbi Yochanan, Hachab Mayaskin, and here in this brisa, what are we dealing with? Kagon shehikdishuhu bailim biyad ganav. The case actually is the ganav, he stole the animal, and it's not that the ganav made it hektish, it's actually the original owner that made it hektish, and then when he slaughters it, he's slaughtering the animal of hektish, and there's no dalid v'hei because it's an animal of hektish, and even though the ganav is not able to make it hektish, because we're talking before yesh, but the owner is able to make it hektish, that's actually the case in this brisa. But the Gemara says, Umi Kaddish, but if the owner tries to make it hektish, is it really going to be effective? Will it really be hektish when an owner makes his animal hektish if it's already been stolen from him? V'yomer Rabbi Yochanan, but didn't Rabbi Yochanan say, Gazal v'lo nisiyayishu habaylim, if a person steals something, but the original owner was not miyayish, the halacha is shneihen einon yecholon lahaktish. Both of them are not able to make it hektish. Zelafisha eno shalo, this one, meaning the gazlan, he can't make it hektish because it's not shalo, it's not his, it really belongs to the original owner. But this one also, the original owner also can't make it hektish because it's not in his possession. Right now it's in the physical possession of the gazlan. So how does it help us to say that the original owner is the one that's making the animal hektish? The original owner also does not have the ability in this case of gezel v'lo nisiyayishu bailim. He also doesn't have the ability to make it hektish. And the Gemara says, Amri, the sages answer, they say as follows, Hu do amar kitznuin. Reish Lakish doesn't agree with Rabbi Yochanan on this point. Rather, Reish Lakish says like the tznuin, the modest ones, the pious ones, the Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, hatznuin, the pious ones, manichen es hamos, they would place down some money. We're talking here about kerem revoy, that's the fruits of the vineyard in the 4th year. The halacha is you have to eat in Yerushalayim, or you have to redeem it onto money. And the Tznuin were concerned that people would take these fruits and they would eat it outside of Yerushalayim. They would steal the fruits essentially, but not bring it to Yerushalayim to eat it. They didn't want them to violate any halacha, and so therefore the Tznuin would set aside some money. V'omrim, and they would say, Kol hanilkut mizeh, anything that's taken from this without permission, yehei mechul al hamos ha'elu, we're going to redeem those fruits on this money, and that way when these individuals eat from these fruits outside of Yerushalayim, it will not be a problem. And so what do you see from the tznuin? You have a situation here where people are stealing from the tznuin, and yet the tznuin do have the ability to redeem the kedusha onto money. Similarly, according to the tznuin, the tznuin would say that people have the ability, the original owners have the ability to make it hektish, even if it's not bereshusam, even if it's been stolen from them. That's what Reish Lakish holds in contrast to Rabbi Yochanan. But the Gemara continues and asks on Reish Lakish's approach, but if the situation over here is that the person stole it, we're talking lifnei yush, and it's the original owners who made it hektish. So we say that when the original owner makes it hektish, we say that there's no dalet v'hei, but there is kefil. But that doesn't make sense that there's kefil, because it's actually chazra keren l'bailim. It's as if the owners have actually taken back the principle by making it hektish, and by that hektish being effective, it's essentially like it's returned to the owner. So if it's like it's returned to the owner, so then there actually wouldn't be kefil in that situation. As Rashi says, the Karen has already returned. If the Bailim have now made it hektish, kefil amay mishalim, why does the Ganav pay kefil? The principle has now returned to the original owner, because they were able to make it hektish wherever it is. The Ganav is only chayiv to pay kefil if it's found to be in the hands of the Ganav, meaning when he's brought to court with the Eidim, it's in his possession. Shabo Eidim, that the Eidim come, the Eidim come and it's found in his hand, it's found in his possession, but that is not the case if the original owner made it hektish. And the Gemara says, Kisha Amad Bedin, the Gemara says that Reish Lakish will understand the Bryce it's talking where there already was a court case. So the court came and said that he has to pay kefil, and once the court said he has to pay kefil, so it was found in his hands through Eidim and he has to pay kefil, and then what happened was the original owner made it hektish and then he slaughters it, so it's saying there's no dalet v'hei because it's hektish, but there is going to be kefil. As Rashi explains, Kisho Amad Bedin, Shabo Eidim, Kodem Shikdishu Bailim, the Eidim come before the Bailim make it hektish, again, that's why it's chayiv kefil, then the Bailim make it hektish, and there's no dalet v'hei. But the Gemara says, hey chidami, but what exactly is the case? Ida Amrit say Tainlo, if the court said go and give it back, meaning the court essentially paskined at this point in time that he is chayiv, and then we're saying that the original owner made it hektish, so ma'ir yehiktish, why do you have to talk about a case where the original owner made it hektish? Afilu lo hektish nami lo l'chayve, even if the original owner from at this point in time did not make it hektish, and let's say now after the court says to return it, and the court issues its ruling, then the individual, the ganav, goes ahead and he slaughters the animal, he also won't be chayiv dalet v'hei. Forget about hektish. Diyamar Rava, because Rava said it's say tainlo, once the court says give it back to him, tavach umachar pater, if he then slaughters or sells it, he is pater on dalet v'hei, even forgetting about any issues of hektish. My time, what's the reason? Kevan de paskua lemilse, because since they issued this final ruling, v'tavach umachar, and then he goes ahead and slaughters and sells it, havale gazlan, he then becomes a gazlan. A gazlan again is someone who steals out in the open. He doesn't try to do it in secrecy. The gazlan eno mishalim tashlumi arba v'chamisha, and the rule is a gazlan doesn't pay 4 or 5 times the amount. That's only by a ganev, so it can't be we're talking about a case of tzei teinlo, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Tes Amud Aleph.